Hi everyone, and welcome back to Advancing with Watercolor. This is third week of looking at clouds, and we started with some exercises that focused on generating different types of clouds. And then we started to build an image in a single color looking at cows and clouds. And this week is our final painting of this series where we're focusing on a color version of the scene. I invite you to look below where there's a free PDF file that you can download and use to help you build this painting. So let's head over to the table, pick up our brushes, and get started on this scene. Well, there's nothing that's as relaxing as painting cows grazing under the clouds. All right, we're going to try a little scene here, but it's mostly for practice. I'm using basically dirty water to get started, and I'm going to use that dirty water to kind of paint the clouds. So I want to keep a paper towel in my hand, and I'm using a brush that is a little older. Let's just start making some of these clouds. And as they come down, getting a little smaller towards the horizon. Here's our horizon. And I'm going to be using a cloud sort of behind my big tree. That's a little bit of a strategy. I want to have it a little brighter back there. Okay, then we're going to pick up some of our bluish color. Let's see how this shapes our cloud. Nice edges. Continue that below. And as we get to the horizon, a little more water and a little grayer blue. Until the clouds themselves are just very, very flat and sort of disappearing, fading into the horizon. There's our clouds. And yes, I can see manipulating that shape, but I know that it's going to get me into trouble. So I'm going to leave it as it is. And I'm going to start to build the feeling of the grass using just a pale greenish color. Work it right into the horizon so that there's a smooth transition. I'm getting some little highlights here, which I will probably make use of. Let's continue this down.
Keeping it kind of dry, maybe a little deeper now, a little more yellow. A little more green, in fact. There. That's our open field. Trying to create this a little bit of a graded wash towards the front, right? Like that. I might even turn this upside down, let the color drift back up before it dries. That's the first stage.
Let's continue together on to stage 3, where we paint details for the most part. I'm returning to the cows in the foreground, and what I'm focusing on are giving some important details to these particular cows. That means adding features of the head. In particular, the way the ears come off of the head denotes cows. They come off in a flat manner, and they're rather large. Putting them into a few different postures. After I initially placed the cattle, if you remember in the beginning, we created the shapes very quickly. The time now has come to kind of refine those shapes and give them a few details, a little bit of the coloring that we see in a Holstein, but I'm letting the watercolor kind of tell me how to finish them. I'm not using a particular image or reference for these cattle. I'm simply relying on memory and sort of a shape that appears when I look at the cows or the shapes in front of me. For example, I've made an effort to place these shapes overlapping each other, as though we're looking at one cow in front, one cow behind, one cow to the side, and I try to finish that idea by showing the head of one cow reaching the ground or coming towards us or lifting. These are the details that I think make it more convincing. And I'm particularly focusing on this sort of quartet that's in the foreground. I'm putting a few details on the distant cows, yes, but they're really small, so the details that follow are kind of minor. And I'm counting on the work that we do in this sort of quartet in the foreground to really convince us that we're looking at cattle. And if we do that, we can imply that the rest are cattle. It's a interesting trick of the mind. If we see a sort of a shape that looks recognizable, we kind of assume that the rest of the shapes that are similar are like shapes, or cattle in this case. So we use this a lot in painting to kind of make it a little easier job and allow us to be a little freer as well. Okay, so I've been using a mixture. I'm taking up some of the leftovers that were used in the painting, mostly blues and browns. I'm trying to avoid green as I paint the cows. And I've been using a little bit of lavender to suggest a lighter area in the markings of the Holstein. I've been mixing some black with these leftovers so that I can get a darker marking, especially where I can show the profile or a very convincing pose. I'll use the strong dark where there's a lot of contrast to really help it to read. Of course, we're using a smaller brush. We're moving slower. That sort of frenetic energy that was abundant in the beginning now has kind of matured, and we're really just concentrating on finishing the marks that we made in the beginning. Not adding anything really new, but simply refining those marks and bringing them to life with a few darks or a few lights. Highlights as well. I've been putting some highlights onto the heads of the cows or back if they're in the sunlight. Even places where you wouldn't necessarily see a light, I've been adding a few lights. For that I'm using titanium white, a Holbein white that's mixed with a little bit of yellow just to make it feel a little more like a sunstruck surface. If we use just the titanium white, it can feel a little cold, so I'm choosing to make it feel a little warmer. And I really want to step back quite often at this stage to kind of regard the painting as a whole, see the big picture. And as I do that, I can tell, oh, this section is working pretty well. I need another touch here. A shadow is missing there. And I'll go back and forth, working with the foreground and into the midground, and even some small touches in the background. Here you can see me adding some of the highlights, especially where the cows are overlapping. We can separate them by means of a highlight, or we can bring if a cow is sort of meeting with the foliage in the background, we can separate them with a highlight. So it's a really effective tool, especially at this stage in the painting where we don't want to do too much, but we need just a little extra refinement in a certain area. A simple touch of white can do that. It's interesting to see how the painting has dried. That brushwork that we put into the tree, for example, has a nice free feel to it. You can see how important visually leaving some spaces or gaps in the foliage so that we can see through to the sky gives us a more natural feel. That large shadow that we placed in the conclusion of the second stage is looking good. So the painting has come out pretty spontaneously so far. I'm very pleased about that. What I want to do, well, what I'm adding here, you can see I've mixed a bit of green with my white, and I noticed that if I paint just a dot under the belly of some of these cows, I give a little more feeling of that they're elevated or standing. So I've been doing that here and there. This helps also to create a little sense of transparency in this big shadow that's coming across the foreground when we paint a few darks into that, whether it's the trunk of a tree or the head of a cow. It makes that area feel more transparent. And that means that it feels like the light is bouncing within the shadow. Well, when I was conjuring up this painting, of course, I've thought about some of my favorite artists who painted similar scenes, and my mind remembers Francois Millet, who really painted quite a few works of his natural surroundings. He focused a lot on farm life and a lot on the sort of early part of the day or the later part of the day. But you can see how he brings about these sorts of scenes in a really poetic way. Minimal amount of detail and lovely glowing colors. Well, we're almost to the finish. Here's one point. I eliminate the cow completely. Couldn't quite read that section, so well, I just made it easier to read by painting out that whole cow. And Now we have a overlapping of 2 cows instead of 3. I just mixed a little of the leftover green with some of my white, and it's a pretty close match. At this stage, it's just dots and dashes, nothing more. But I put them on rather slowly and try to have a little forethought as to what's going to happen when I put down such a mark. And then I like to step back and kind of regard it and see if it was the right placement.